Discipline is often misunderstood. People hear the word and immediately think of punishment, of rigidity, of restriction, but that is a shallow interpretation. Discipline in its truest form is about integrity. It's the architecture of inner integrity. It's what allows us to live in alignment with our values, to become the kind of men we aspire to be when no one else is watching. It's not something imposed from the outside, but rather something cultivated from within. And at its core, it is a deep expression of self-respect. Think for a moment about the choices you make in the quiet hours, when there's no applause to earn, no performance to give, no audience to impress. Those choices reveal the architecture of your character, and discipline is what determines the shape of that architecture. It's the quiet commitment to do what is right over what is easy. That's not just about productivity or success, it's about living with dignity. Because when you live in accordance with your principles, even when it's inconvenient, you're saying to yourself, I matter, my values matter, my future matters. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and short-term gratification, discipline is countercultural. It's choosing to delay pleasure, not because you hate joy, but because you respect yourself enough to aim higher. And that's what so many young men today are searching for. Not control, not bravado, but purpose. And purpose is sustained by discipline. Without it, purpose becomes a hollow word, a fleeting dream. But with it, purpose becomes tangible, it becomes real. I see this especially in the lives of boys transitioning into manhood. They are desperate, not just for freedom, but for form. They want to know where the edges are. They want to know who they could become if they didn't give in to every urge, every distraction, every pull toward mediocrity. That's the power of discipline. It's not a cage, it's a compass. And when we present discipline as something external, something imposed by parents, schools, or institutions, we rob young men of the opportunity to take ownership of their own character. That ownership begins with self-respect. Okay. You don't consistently make difficult choices unless you believe you're worth the effort. You don't say no to the easy path unless you believe that the harder one leads somewhere worthwhile. Discipline flows from self-respect in the same way that roots nourish a tree. Without it, there's no stability. Without it, growth is shallow. But with it, a man becomes grounded, not rigid, but resilient. When we speak of values like integrity or honor or courage, these aren't abstract ideals. They are habits. They are decisions repeated over time. And the mechanism that holds those habits in place, that keeps a man showing up even when it's hard, is discipline, not as a tool of repression, but as a declaration of who he is and what he stands for. That's the kind of discipline we need to talk about more often, not the drill sergeant kind, but the quiet, unwavering kind, the kind that shows up every morning and says, I will do this again today because I said I would. And let's be clear, this kind of discipline is not perfectionism. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about returning to your values after the fall. It's about choosing again and again to live with intention, even when you've failed. That too is self-respect, the refusal to give up on yourself, the decision to keep building the architecture of your integrity, brick by brick, moment by moment. I worry that we are teaching young people to outsource their sense of worth to performance metrics, to likes and shares and followers. But a man with discipline doesn't need the world's approval to validate his worth. He knows who he is because he has earned his own trust. That trust, self-trust, is forged in discipline. And once you have it, the noise of the world quiets down. You no longer chase every trend, every opinion, every fleeting pleasure. You have your own anchor. And this in turn allows you to be more fully present for your relationships, your work, your purpose. Because when you are not ruled by impulse, you become available to others in a deeper, more meaningful way. Discipline frees you to be the man your family, your community, and your future self can rely on, not because you're perfect, but because you're principled. We don't need more men chasing dominance or hiding behind false confidence. We need men who have done the inner work of discipline, who walk into the world with clarity and self-respect. Men who are not tossed around by every storm because they have built something solid inside themselves. That solidity, that inner architecture is not accidental. It is intentional. It is crafted through discipline. And at the heart of that discipline is a profound act of self-respect. The belief that who you are becoming is worth the struggle it takes to get there. Too often, especially today, we see young men drifting through life, constantly seeking signals from the outside world to tell them who they are, what they're worth, and what to do next. It's not their fault entirely. Our culture bombards them with messages that identity, success, and even manhood itself are things to be performed for likes, for followers, for applause. The result is a generation of men trained to perform, but not prepared to stand still in the silence of their own conscience. They seek validation, but not direction. And that, I believe, is where discipline becomes not just useful, but essential, because discipline, properly understood, is the transition from a life governed by external validation to one anchored in internal sovereignty. It is the moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes hard fought, when a man says, I know who I am, and I know what I stand for, regardless of who's watching. That is not an easy place to get to, but it is without question the most powerful place a man can live from. There is a kind of freedom that comes when you stop performing and start living on principle. And that's what discipline allows. Not the rigid, militaristic kind of discipline that is often caricatured or mocked. I'm talking about the kind of discipline that quietly governs your decisions because you've taken the time to define what matters to you. It's the discipline that helps you shut your laptop when it's time to be present with your child, even though there's more work to do. It's the discipline that keeps you honest in a moment when no one would know if you cut a corner. It's the discipline that says no to short-term pleasure in favor of long-term purpose. This is not about stoicism or asceticism. It's about agency. It's about no longer needing someone else to give you a reason to act well because you've already given that reason to yourself. The man who lives with discipline isn't waiting for the world to reward him. He's already decided what's worth doing. That's self-respect in action. And when you respect yourself deeply and truly, you do not waste your time. You do not waste your energy. And perhaps most importantly, you do not waste your potential. Now, I want to be clear. Discipline doesn't mean perfection. It means consistency. It means showing up for yourself, even on the days you don't feel like it, especially on the days you don't feel like it. Because here's the thing, when we only act based on how we feel in the moment, we are at the mercy of every passing mood. But when we act based on who we've decided to be, we gain a kind of quiet strength that doesn't need constant reinforcement. That's what I mean by internal sovereignty. It's the capacity to be your own compass, to say, this is my standard, this is my path, and I will walk it, even if no one claps. That's not arrogant. That's grown up, that's maturity, and it's rare because it takes time, effort, and an unwavering commitment to aligning your life with your value. It's also, I believe, the most vital form of freedom a man can achieve. It's easy to mistake discipline for sacrifice, but the truth is, discipline isn't giving up the good life. It's choosing the best life, the life that you won't look back on with regret, the life that costs you in the short term, yes, but pays dividends in meaning, dignity, and peace of mind. And those aren't small things. In fact, in a world that tries to distract you, derail you, and sell your attention to the highest bidder, a man who lives by his own standard is nothing short of revolutionary. And here's where it all connects. When you respect yourself enough to live with discipline, you become someone others can rely on. You become steady in a world that is chaotic. You become trustworthy in a culture that often rewards shortcuts and spectacle. And maybe most importantly, you become the kind of man who no longer needs applause to know he's doing well. You become the kind of man who can stand alone, not because he wants to, but because sometimes that's what integrity demands. There's immense power in being able to say, I didn't do it for recognition, I did it because it was right. That's what it means to be truly free. That's what it means to have self-respect at the highest level, and that is what discipline at its best makes possible. The applause fades, the spotlight moves, and the noise always returns, but the man who governs himself, he endures. In thinking seriously about what it means to be a man today, we have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Many of the qualities we once associated with masculinity, strength, stoicism, control have been either misused or misunderstood until we find ourselves in a time of reevaluation, even confusion. But the solution isn't to abandon these qualities, rather we must refine them. And at the heart of that refinement is discipline. Discipline, as I see it, is not about being rigid or unfeeling. It's not about obeying arbitrary rules or adopting a hyper-controlling posture toward life. No. Discipline is something far deeper and more personal. It is, in its truest form, an expression of self-respect. And more than that, it is the highest form of self-respect, because it requires us to hold ourselves to a standard, not for appearance, not for praise, but because we believe at our core that we are worth holding to that standard. This is where the conversation about masculinity gets interesting. For generations, the idea of being a man has been intertwined with the notion of control, controlling the environment, asserting authority, even controlling others. That model is increasingly bankrupt. We see its consequences in broken relationships, disconnection, and a pervasive sense of aimlessness. But here's the twist. Control isn't inherently wrong, it's just been misdirected. The real test of a man's strength today is not how well he controls others, but how well he governs himself. That's what I mean by self-mastery. It is about the deliberate and ongoing effort to align one's actions with one's values, not in a moment of performance, but consistently, especially when no one is watching. That's when discipline becomes something sacred. It's the quiet decision to show up to your commitments, to your responsibilities, to your own future, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. And that kind of self-mastery is not imposed from the outside. It can't be. It comes from within. It has to, which means that it is fundamentally an act of self-respect to say, I will not betray my values. I will not dishonor the trust others have in me. I will not treat my time, my body, my energy as if they are worthless. That is discipline. It is not punishment. It is reverence for who you are and who you're becoming. Now, this may sound aspirational, and it should, because men today are too often told that to struggle is weakness, or worse, that they are somehow the problem. But struggle is not weakness. Discipline is forged in struggle. And masculinity, when grounded in self-respect and expressed through discipline, becomes not a threat, but a gift to families, to communities, to the culture at large. I've spoken to countless young men who feel lost. They're unsure of what the future holds, of what they're supposed to be aiming for, of what it means to be good. And I always come back to this. Start with self-respect. Begin there. Build discipline, not as an external display, but as an internal compass. Because in a world that's constantly trying to pull you off course, discipline is what keeps you anchored. It is what allows you to stand firm in your own values, to withstand the noise and distraction and confusion, and to move with quiet confidence. And here's the paradox. The more a man disciplines himself, not harshly, but lovingly, the freer he becomes. He is no longer captive to his worst impulses. He is no longer at the mercy of momentary desires or social validation. He doesn't need to dominate others to feel powerful. He doesn't need to shout to feel heard, because he knows who he is. And that knowledge, earned through effort, through consistency, through discipline, is what makes him trustworthy. It makes him dependable. It makes him strong. So if we want to reimagine masculinity for this generation and the next, we must place discipline not as a tool of oppression, but as an act of moral courage at the center of that vision. Because a man who respects himself deeply enough to live with discipline is a man who can be trusted to respect others. And that is the kind of man our world needs more than ever. Discipline is nothing but self-respect at the highest level. All the potential in the world means nothing without the discipline to realize it. That's the uncomfortable truth. We don't tell enough young men today. We talk a lot about dreams, about possibilities, about untapped talent. And of course, that's important, vital even. But potential without action, without follow through, without commitment is just a kind of polite fantasy. Discipline is what transforms that fantasy into something real. It's the daily practice, the quiet repetition, the refusal to give in to comfort that brings a man from the abstract idea of who he could be to the concrete reality of who he is becoming. We live in a world saturated with messages about freedom and choice. Choose your path, follow your passion, create your own identity. These are empowering ideas on the surface, but for many, they become paralyzing. Because when every door is open, it can be incredibly difficult to walk through just one. It feels safer to stand in the hallway, full of possibilities, but paralyzed by the fear of choosing the wrong one. Discipline, however, demands that we commit, that we pick a direction, take a step, and keep walking, even when no one is clapping and no one is watching. That is not about being rigid or joyless. It is about having enough self-respect to stay loyal to the process of becoming who you said you wanted to be, even on the days it's hard. For young men especially, the idea of discipline has often been associated with punishment, with conformity, or with submission to authority, but that's a deeply misleading frame. True discipline isn't imposed, it's chosen. It is not something done to you, it is something done by you and for you. And that makes it one of the most radical forms of self-respect, because it says, I believe I am worth the effort. I believe my life matters enough to show up for it fully, consistently, even when no one else is checking in. We talk about purpose like it's a destination, a grand glowing sign at the end of the road. But in truth, purpose is built brick by brick. It's built in early mornings, in late nights, in turning off distractions and turning toward growth. Discipline is the bricklayer. It lays the groundwork for purpose, not as a moment of arrival, but as a pattern of living. When you do hard things repeatedly, not because someone is making you, but because you've made a promise to yourself, that's where purpose lives. It lives in keeping that promise. There's an important distinction here between discipline and performance. Performance is about what the world sees. Discipline is about what you see when you're alone with yourself. It's the difference between impressing and becoming. Performance seeks applause, discipline seeks alignment. And in the long run, alignment always wins, because a life built on performance needs constant reinforcement. A life built on discipline, on the other hand, becomes self-sustaining. It creates momentum, direction, and eventually meaning. This isn't to suggest that discipline is glamorous. It's often not. It's quiet, it's repetitive, it can feel boring. And in a culture addicted to novelty, boredom is treated like failure. But boredom, when you're doing something worthwhile, is actually a signal that you're on the right path. It means you're past the honeymoon stage, past the dopamine hit, and into the realm of real lived experience. You're not chasing the rush, you're building a life. That's a radically different orientation to the world, and one that far too few are taught to value. One of the great tragedies I see is young men who sense they have something to offer, intelligence, creativity, leadership, but they lack the internal structure to develop it. Not because they're lazy or broken, but because no one ever taught them that discipline is a form of love. Not just love for your future self, but love for your present self. Because you are saying every day, I am worth showing up for. You're not waiting for motivation to strike. You're not waiting for someone else to give you permission. You've already granted it to yourself, and you act accordingly. This is why discipline cannot be outsourced. It's deeply personal. You can be inspired by others, guided by mentors, influenced by your environment, but at the end of the day, it comes down to you. No one else can do your push-ups. No one else can read your books. No one else can make you become who you were meant to be. That's your work, and it is noble work. So when I say that discipline is nothing but self-respect at the highest level, I mean it quite literally. It is a declaration that your life is worth shaping, worth refining, worth fighting for. That your potential is not a burden, but a gift. And that the only way to honor that gift is by doing the work again and again, especially when no one is watching. Discipline isn't the enemy of freedom, it's the foundation of it.